Hey guys, what's going on? This has to be a re-record, unfortunately. I was actually in the wrong position for this video, and I covered a lot of the stuff with my ugly head here. So let's go ahead and get started here. So, where did I last leave off here? Ah, yes. Just double checking to make sure that I know which video I stopped off with here. Okay. So I can just go ahead and delete those two. Give me a moment, guys. I apologize for the delay. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started now. This video is going to contain an introduction to the lighting, an introduction to the lighting solution in UE4, UE5, and an introduction to the basic lighting setup that you need to know inside of Unreal to get lighting started. I'm going to tell you right now that this is going to be done without Lumen, at least for this session. I will reintroduce Lumen next week when we start talking about some of the more real-time lighting scenarios. But for now, we need to focus on understanding the lighting, understanding the basics, and setting up this project pretty simply. So, just like I did in previous videos, I've already got this set up, but go ahead and start a new level. Go ahead and start a new project. Go ahead and start a new level. It should have starter content, but it doesn't need to start with any of the first person, etc., etc. What you're going to see is probably a scene with a chair and a table. Just go ahead and hit File, New Level, and just open up the default. Cool. As you can see, I've already got a few maps in here for the tests. And go ahead and we're going to disable Lumen for this particular demo. So make sure you go into Project Settings, go down to the Rendering tab. I wish they had a button that lets you turn this off immediately. Go down to the Rendering tab, make sure Dynamic Global Illumination is set to none, your Reflection method is set to none, and your Shadow Map method is set to Shadow Maps. We don't have to disable anything else for now. We don't have to disable Temporal Super Resolution. That's totally okay. This is going to be a Lumen-free project. We don't want to use Lumen for this particular project because, well, there's two different methodologies to the lighting in Unreal. There is a system in it called Lightmaps, and that is a current standard for how it decides to light. This is my kitten. I don't know why she's in my lap. Get going, sweetie. The current standard for lighting in Unreal Engine 5 and Unreal Engine 4 predominantly is UE5 uses Lumen for a lot of things, and UE4 uses this current system, but the current industry does not have a shipped game that utilizes Lumen. We will cover Lumen next week. But as far as this week is concerned, what we're going to do is we're going to disable Lumen. The demos from here on out are going to assume that you do not have Lumen turned on. Alright? So assume from here on out that Lumen is not in play. We are going to be focusing on lighting using Lightmaps and understanding how baked lighting works, understanding the terminology related to light baking, understand some of the essence of why we would want to choose to use certain lights, understand those particular settings, and then we're going to go from there. So make sure that before you follow along in this demo, you create a new level, whatever it happens to be, disable Lumen for this particular demo for this week, and then next week we'll play around with this a little bit more. We'll do a Lumen demo the best that we can, considering our machines probably aren't up to snuff. At least some of us aren't. I know mine isn't, but I can still do a demo. And then we can go from there. So make sure you disable Lumen. I'm going to go ahead and close my project settings, and I'm going to check to see if I have... Make sure that you only have one sky sphere. I notice that sometimes there could be a bug where a sky sphere gets created up to several on accident. Make sure that you only have one sky sphere in your scene. And now let's go ahead and tune this to something that we can use. I'm going to go ahead and delete the player start. and you should do the same, follow along. I'm going to delete the sphere reflection capture actor. I'm going to disable the skylight by deleting it, and then I am going to delete the light source. Yes, it's being referenced, it's fine, hit yes. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the top view here. I'm going to select the floor panel, and I'm just going to make a few copies of it. So I'm going to select all these floor pieces here, and then I'm going to move these over. And I'm going to make this maybe 100 centimeters here, and then I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to move these bad boys over. Should be fine. They should not be overlapping. It looks good. Cool. Let's go back in the perspective view. Let's make sure we're facing in the correct direction. Mr. Figueroa, without the player start, which way is forward? You can't see the gizmo, technically, but your... Let me actually move this slightly so you can see the gizmo. See the gizmo down there? X is forward. So always keep that in mind. Let me just move my picture again a little bit, just so much I'm in the right spot. Alright. So with our scene selected and our scene kind of set up for what we have, let's go ahead and do a quick lighting build. Let's hit Control, Shift, semicolon. Now, again, as I've explained in the past, what is happening right now is the swarm agent is kind of doing a lighting build, and it's putting our light together, and it's kind of lighting the scene. You might be wondering, Mr. Figueroa, why can we still see the sky? Well, the sky is lit by itself. The sky is going to be different. You're going to always be able to see the sky when you are using UE4, UE5. It has its own lighting. It has its own properties. You don't need to worry so much about... Sorry, I'm clicking off of my notes here because I'm re-recording over a video that I did a little bit ago. So I just couldn't leave myself floating in front of the details panel because it was complete waste for of you guys' time. So this is a re-recording, like I said. All right, go ahead and take a few minutes and put your scene together so that it looks similar to mine. What you're going to be doing is we're going to be lighting into a scene. So remember, disable lumen, start a new project. I'll start from the beginning. Start a new project, create a new level, disable lumen, and then multiply your ground so that you have a 3 by 3 by a 3 by 3 floor grid, so that we can continue to work with this. I'm also going to select all the floor pieces and group them together. I'm just going to hit Control G to make sure that they're all grouped so I can select them all. That way I know they're all selected when I'm looking at them, and it makes everything a little bit easier. At least for now. I'll worry about texturing them here shortly. But anyways, let's talk about the... If you guys see me looking over here, it's because I'm looking at the video that I just recorded that was a complete mess. So let's go ahead and talk about the lights. I'm going to go ahead and hit Alt-P. Oh, I'm in play mode, excuse me. Is it Alt-P? It's supposed to be Alt-P. Ah. Play this level in the editor viewport or place actors panel is... Wait, is that different? P? Hold on. Let me take a look at that. It's interesting. Is that going to work? No, that's very strange. That's kind of a conflict because Alt-P is the play button. Oh well. Go ahead and open up the Place Actors panel. And while you are in the Place Actors panel, we can go ahead and create through here, but UE4 folks, we're going to try to reproduce everything that you have as well. You'll be able to do the same things as us, so just follow along and be fine. This is a non-lumen demo, so it'll be fine. Let's go ahead and go over to the Lighting tab. And this fundamentally is the toolbox that we can use to generate lighting in the Unreal Engine. It by and large contains all the tools that we have access to. This does not include things like emissive textures, textures that glow. This does not include elements that are part of a lighting scenario but are not necessarily themselves considered lights, like visual effects. We'll talk about those in a future demo. But for now, let's go ahead and focus on the lights in the Place Actors panel, regardless of whether or not you are in UE4 or UE5, and we'll go with this for now. Let me go ahead and shrink this down a little bit so I can get a little bit more space here. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to go past the directional light, and we're going to start by talking about the point light. Let's go ahead and drag one into the scene, and this is the same light that you guys have been encouraged to make, where you can use L and left click to make a very quick point light. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this bad boy. And do you guys see what's kind of happening with, watch what happens if I look away, look back. That is something called the adaptive eye. In the video after this, you're going to see how to disable that, why you would want it, why you don't want it, and how to affect its performance so that you can get better looking games and better looking lighting just out of the box. Let's go ahead and have a look at some of the detail settings for the lights and kind of figure out what each of them does, and then talk about each of their settings. Now I'm going to mention that some of them do work, some of them do something, and some of them don't relate it to the lights as they are currently. Don't worry about it, I'll cover them when I can. Over here in the details panel, we have its transform panel. The transform panel is basically a record of where this object is going to be located. I talked about this in the past. It also stores things like the rotation or scale of the light, but funnily enough, rotating a light only really affects a couple of them. A point light is considered a light that is a point that emits light in a radius and doesn't have a definite body to it. It can be given something similar, but it doesn't necessarily have a direction that it can be pointed in, with some caveats. I'll explain that in a second. The most important thing that you can take away from the transform panel is the mobility settings. Lights can be static, stationary, or movable. Let's very quickly talk about those elements. They're going to be expanded on in the video after this, but let's talk about them anyways. Mobility has to deal with the lighting solution and the properties of the shadows and the baking solution that is going to take place when you use the lighting build. Again, we are not using Lumen, so we are building as current gen stuff is currently being built. A static light is a light that is considered something called fully baked, meaning any of the shadows that come off of the light are cooked onto a texture, which is essentially just a picture, and then that picture is like wallpaper overlaid over a surface, and it pretends to be a shadow. So for example, if I took some chalk and I drew a shadow of my arm underneath my arm, that's essentially what we're doing with static light. It is assumed that the light is not going to move, it is assumed that the light is not going to change in intensity, and it's assumed that the light is not going to change in color. That is what makes static lighting incredibly performant, but also really ugly. Stationary light, I'll skip that one and talk about that one in a second. A movable light is the exact opposite of a static light. Whereas a static light will fake a shadow, a movable light is 100% dynamic. What does 100% dynamic mean in Unreal? Well, it means that the shadow that is being cast is being checked on every frame to make sure that the shadow is being cast accurately. It is a combination of something called Lightmaps, which is what that is. It's a texture that contains all the shadow information, and a combination of something called cascaded shadow maps. Those two things together, light maps and cascaded shadow maps, come together in order to make something a little bit more real time. And in fact, movable lighting doesn't even use light maps. Movable lighting is designed to use an incredibly decent looking real-time shadow that doesn't need to cook a texture, it doesn't need baking, and it doesn't need the support of other systems inside of Unreal in order to work. But the fidelity of it can be sometimes questionable. You would want an immovable light when you are in a scenario where the light needs to be fully dynamic, where you need to have a dynamic sunlight system, where the light is being moved. Like, for example, a flashlight is considered dynamic. Stationary is a light that cannot move, but a light that can be changed in terms of its intensity and its color. But there are some caveats, as you'll see in a video in the future. I don't want to get too far into the mobility settings because I explained them in another video, but nonetheless, it is important to know that the mobility settings for lights exist here. The mobility settings for lights are different than objects. Objects tend to be very easy to work with. Objects typically automatically have their mobility set for them. For example, go ahead and click on the floor and click on one of the components. I'm going to ungroup this by hitting Shift-G. Clicking on the centermost component, we see that the mobility of this floor piece is static. That means it's not moving. Objects don't necessarily move, but they have things that can change in them property-wise. Typically speaking, objects like the background, the environment, those are static. They will never move. And movable means an object is going to move. This is typically saved for vehicles and characters and things that are going to move in the space. It just means that the engine needs to parse their location every frame. Go back to the light. Underneath mobility settings, we have the light settings. And underneath the light settings, we have this lovely caret here. We don't need to worry about show advanced in this particular class because it is not important for the purposes of this particular course, at least for now. There are much more advanced lighting solutions and techniques, but with the presence of lumen, it becomes a little bit less important because lumen, if your hardware can run it, is a lot better. And we will do a lumen demo in the future. Under light, you have different settings. You have intensity, which controls the intensity based on a value called CD, which is candelas, or candle power. This can be changed as well. If we go down here into Show Advanced, we can change the intensity to lumens, to a different type of intensities, or unitless. Typically, unitless is a scary, nebulous idea of what brightness is supposed to be. Use candelas for small lights or lumens for larger lights. It really just depends on what you want. They are exponentially brighter. So candelas is much smaller than lumens. Candelas, and candle power are terms that I use to refer to CD, to refer to a small light that doesn't emit a significant amount of power but is good for lighting interior scenes. As you can see, I can move this slider around and the light adjusts. Now, it has a maximum of 160 candles, but by putting in a number manually, we can improve and increase the amount of overall power that is in the light itself. Pretty straightforward. Light color is also pretty straightforward. You can control the R, G, and B values, or if you click on the setting right here, you can change the light color manually. By clicking on the color spectrum, you can go between the wheel, which allows you to control the saturation and the value, and use kind of the Photoshop-y, what's this called? The color spectrum. And you can drag and drop colors to save them here. And save themes of colors if you want to create a palette for your lighting, essentially. It's actually quite nice. You do want sRGB preview on, typically. I almost never have turned it off. This is just a color correction for what it's supposed to look like with the gamma settings on. This is set at the boss level, which means that your boss or your organization is going to decide whether or not that's on. It's always typically on. It's called linear color space. It's the linear workflow. It's complicated, but for those of you guys who are familiar with it, you'll know how. Personally, I like color wheel and being able to control values from here. You also have an eyedropper that'll let you eyedrop any color that you want, including colors on other monitors. I have the cone from VLC open right now, and that's the orange right there. I have OBS open, and that's the OBS black right there. I have a folder open. I have Spotify green. Let's pick Spotify green. Cool. And just by left-clicking it, you can store that color, and that's Spotify green. Awesome. Hitting OK saves the options. Attenuation radius can also be affected by scaling a light. So if we select the light, and then we press E. Am I in the right? Excuse me. My fingers were in the wrong place, sorry. Select R for scale. You can see that scaling up and down the light has an effect on its attenuation radius. You can also manually slide it over there. Personally, I like to scale the lights. Source radius controls the size of the source, but this has such a minor, you probably see it, this has such a minor effect on the overall lighting effect for the point light that I would argue that it's almost worthless, but to each their own. Soft source radius is more or less the same. In fact, for this particular light, you don't even get a gizmo because it does nothing. It does so little that it might as well not even exist, at least at candle power. Once you start getting into lumens, you start getting a little bit more value over it. Source length, funnily enough, controls the length of the emission of the light based on both the attenuation radius and the source radius. So that light is now hot dog shaped. I don't know why you would want to do this, because it doesn't work the way that you think. It kind of does, but it kind of doesn't. Let's go ahead and turn up the attenuation radius. And then let's turn up the source length. You see kind of how that works? Got like a lightsaber. Actually, you know what? You gotta get the yellow saber because they're the cool Jedi. You get the idea. Soft source radius still doesn't have much of an effect, as you can see. There's just not enough power in this light as a point light. I usually leave soft source radius alone. Color temperature is exactly that. If we reset our light to white, and then we change color temperature follows the Kelvin scale, the Kelvin timeline, the Kelvin scale of light, color, and temperature. Where an indoor light might be something more like 3500. This is like the light that you would see probably in a vanity or a mirror. Working lights and shop lights tend to be higher in terms of color temperature. My current color temperature in my room right now, in this room, is 5500. This is about the color of the light that I'm seeing, and it's actually pretty close, at least according to my eye. Effects world, and I'm going to bring in a sample box here. I'm going to grab some geometry from a BSP, and I'm going to drop it right there. Cool. Now notice that this box doesn't have mobility settings because it's a BSP and it's pretty useless for that, but it's fine. Let's go ahead and select our light again. Let's scroll down to its settings. Effects world decides whether or not the light is even on. Sometimes you want this to exist because you will toggle this using a blueprint or a function or something. Works pretty well. On off, on off. Cast shadows, however, is kind of trickier. You can turn off shadows for certain objects, or, which is a little bit more complex because there isn't a light lister. Technically, you really shouldn't do that because it's not a great idea, but you can cast shadows. You can just use a light to light up an area without casting a shadow. And let's say I had another light that was casting an actual shadow. That would be my shadow casting light, and the other light would be for gameplay, so that the person could see what was going on. And that's pretty straightforward. Indirect lighting intensity is something that's not going to be played around with in this demo. It deals with volumetric lighting. As you can see, if there's any kind of global illumination or GI, that's where it would be. This is the lighting contribution from the indirect lighting. We don't really see a lot of value here. and it's not going to do anything using these values. Same thing with scattering intensity. We don't have an exponential height fog, and so without an exponential height fog, we don't get that value. Don't worry about that. We'll talk about it in a future demo. Under the Advanced tab, which is what this line here means, you see a bunch of different values in here for the scaling of the light, certain shadow biases and whatnot. Stay away from this for now, guys. This is a little bit scarier and stuff that I don't want to introduce, particularly in the third week. Leave it alone for now. We'll close that. Now, the rest of the lights are based kind of on the same ideas. I'm going to move this light over here, and I'm going to bring in another light. I want to bring in the spotlight. And the spotlight works the same. I'm going to go ahead and up its attenuation radius so that it's below the ground, and then I'm going to give it like 3,000 candles so we can see it. We can change the light color, but with the cone light, we can affect things like an inner cone angle. Now watch what happens if I make this a little bit too big for the outer cone angle. And vice versa. So you see how you can create a very, very precise light, but also something that's going to fill the room and give you a lot of control over the power and whatnot. Source radius is more or less the same as on the point light, but because it's a directional light, the radius is already limited to a cone in front of it. You don't really get a lot of value out of it. Soft source radius, same thing. Without volumetrics, without anything in the source, there's not going to be any effect. And source length is an even weirder one. It makes the light long, but the point is conical. So it doesn't really do anything to make it longer. It does something, obviously, but it's not really enough. Color temperature is the same. Setting color is the same. The mobilities are the same. Effects world, cast shadow, same thing. Pretty straightforward. Let's leave that light. A get rect light is a little bit different. This is a rectangular light and is used a lot. I'm moving a little, you know what, 100 is fine. As you guys can see, I modified my scale so that I can move quite a bit of chunky movement all at once. That's where I want to be. This is the light, has a bunch of different settings. I'm going to add about 1,500 candles so that we can see it. And just like any other light, it has an attenuation radius. It has a source width, which physically makes the light longer. This is what you would use for like a skylight. Notice how it's bound to the attenuation radius over here, though. We have a source height, which changes the height of the light. And we can see that this light has a very harsh cutoff. This is what's called a barn door. You can see that we can affect the distance and the strength of the barn door to get a very focused but flat light. Source texture is a texture map that you can add onto the light. Let's pick something that isn't an HDRI here. Let's pick something that I can find. And kind of, sort of, adds that light color to the light itself. I personally don't like using this because, well, I mean, I guess if you really want, you can see some of the other colors in there. You can see some of the grayish in there and some of the brownish in there and some of the white. Not my favorite thing to use. See if I can get this any closer. It's not a projector, unfortunately, so it will not project very well. That is kind of what we're seeing. You can see kind of what's happening, but like that's not the effect that we really want. We can kind of see, based on how things are happening at these connections, that we're getting something that looks like the texture. Not really my favorite thing to use. Let's go ahead and kick that out and get that white light back. We have use temperature, effects world, cast shadows, same thing as the other lights. let's talk about tacos. Let's talk about tacos. Let's talk about the two remaining lights. These lights are friends. They went to school together, they went to college together, they went to high school together. These are the things that are really important to kind of understand what they do from a technical standpoint when it comes to the engine. Let's go ahead and bring in a directional light. Let's pay attention to what's happening with the shadow on this particular object. Did anyone see that? Does everyone see what it's saying? It's saying preview. Why would it say preview? Let's go ahead and take a look at the mobility settings for our directional light. That's why. By default, lights that come into Unreal are always stationary. If lumen is turned off, then it is assumed that you're going to be using the default shadow map technique, which is, like I said, something called Lightmaps and something else called cascaded shadow maps. That's what you get when you're using a stationary light, but we'll talk about that in a future video. Let me go ahead and put this back on the ground by hitting End, which stomps it down to the ground, which is a really, really nice button to use. Let's talk about this light. Now, moving this light around doesn't actually do anything. Does everybody see how that shadow isn't moving? However, by pressing E, and like I showed you guys in partially in one demo, and rotating the direction of this light, we can affect the length of the shadow, just like we can affect the time of day. Super long shadow for the evening or darkness for below the horizon. What is happening here is it is assuming the location of the sun and horizon. But what's happening here? The light is supposed to be coming from behind us because the light is pointing that way. So why is the sun still right there? The directional light and the sky sphere have a very special relationship. And that has to do with the setting over here on the right. The directional light actor. It actually needs one in order for it to run properly. Let's go ahead and select this and connect our directional light. Boom. By default, the sky's colors are going to be determined by the sun position. Whoa, where's my sun? It's in the right spot now. Wait, Mr. Figueroa, you're saying that the colors of the sky are denoted by the sun position? Absolutely. Watch this. Mr. Figueroa, you just moved the sky, you just moved the sun and the sky didn't update. I know. Kind of a little bit of an annoyance thing. But you have to refresh the material on the sky if you move the light sometimes. If that's what's happening, click this button. Boom. Look at that. And we're not just limited to that. If we point the light from underneath, oh, let me actually get the light rotating in the correct direction. And we update the sky. I accidentally rotated the sky sphere a bunch of times. Whoops. There we go. And we refresh. We see that we are getting something that looks like a sky. I'll talk about making a day and night in a future demo. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and rotate the light so that we get something that looks like day. I'm going to select the sky and I'm going to update its material so that it lights up. Has anyone ever seen a shadow this dark in the middle of the day? Shadows like this don't really happen. I mean, they do sometimes happen. It's very specific. I mean, this is Vanna Black. There's no light in that shadow. It's Vanna Black. This is Vanna Black. Let's see if we can actually get some light going in there. Let's go ahead and do a bake. Control-Shift, semicolon. We might get some better shadows, and we might not. Give that a sec. Okay, we have a little bit of light in here, but this shadow is like pure dark, isn't it? We'll fix that in a second. Let's go ahead and select the directional light, and we can observe that it has very similar settings, if not simpler settings, than the other lights. What makes a directional light powerful is access to things like cascaded shadow maps, light shafts, distance field shadows, and a bunch of other powerful abilities that give this light a bunch of performance. This light is one of the two most important lights if you are going to be lighting outside or if you are going to be lighting using lumen. Lumen is 100% dependent on its lights in order to look good. Lumen can look really bad right out of the box, but with a little bit of work from your directional light and your adjacent lights, you can make some stellar looking light. Same thing goes here. We have an intensity that we can change. Now bear in mind, we'll talk about the mobility settings in a future video here in the video that follows this one, but whenever you change these values and you are using a stationary light, you're going to want to eventually do a rebake. Because what happens is, let's say, watch this. How is that lit up if there's no light, if I turned it off? There's no light right now. I could delete it. I don't want to delete it, but I could delete it. Why can we see that? How are we able to see right now if there's no light? Because the light information, when we did a bake, is baked onto the surface of the objects at a material level. So what that means is every time you change a light that is either static or stationary, it's not going to update the light mass. It's not going to update your light maps. Light mass and light maps are the same. Light mass is the process, light map is the output. It's just a texture. Just like you would in any game, it's an image that gets applied to everything. Let me set this to 3.14. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, that means every time we change the light in a significant amount or before we ship the game, while we are lighting and we are doing exploratory lighting, you need to build your lighting periodically. Not all the time, but build it periodically so you understand what the scene is going to look like. This is going to build incredibly fast. And again, for those of you who are building manually, UE4 you'll be in the top somewhere over here. UE5, I use the hotkey, but you can build over here on the build tab, build lighting only, and it's based on your lighting quality. Let's go ahead and leave that to preview for now. And of course, based on your engine scalability settings. Mine are currently set to Epic, as yours should be if we are running this demo together. If you can't run it on Epic, I understand, but just understand that it does affect your final gather, which is basically what is happening when your lights are being put together and cooked onto a surface. It's like a sunburn, but with light and shadows. You get the shadow sunburn onto the ground. Notice how there is a, let me actually open that for you. If we go into Windows, and we go into World Settings, and we go under, can I reset this view? Oh, it's not going to let me. Down to Light Mass, and then we open up the Advanced Caret, and we open up Light Maps, and we open up HQ Light Map. Let's turn these off. We can see our assets in the scene, and this is just kind of extra garbage data that's being used by the engine. But this here showcases our light maps as a whole. These are inverted because they're in red, but if we show the alpha, we see the invisible parts. And if we show the red channel, we can see how these shadows are being laid out in the scene. This is a texture that's then being applied. I'll talk about this more in the next video. Let's go back to the details panel. And now let's solve this problem here. Actually, you know what? One more thing before we move on. Let's go back to the details panel. Source angle doesn't do anything. Source angle is set to what our sun is at. It even says so right there. Don't mess with it. Just don't. It messes with the angle of attack of light, and it messes with all your lighting calculations. It's best to leave it alone and to not really mess with it for now. Your source soft angle, this deals with your soft light. This works only if you have atmospheric volume and exponential height fog. I generally leave this alone. You can see that it does have an effect. It is asking for rebuild, but the effect is so minute as to not even really exist when using just a single light source, which is a directional light right now. Color temperature operates the same way as the other, but it's a global thing. It applies it to everything. Well, everything that the directional light can hit. Keep that in mind. And I've already talked about effects world and cast shadows. I don't run into very many reasons why I'd want a directional light that doesn't cast a shadow, but you'd be surprised. You would be surprised when it comes up. If you need more light, you can use more than one directional light, but it isn't healthy for your soul. You can, but generally speaking, you should just use one. There's only a limited amount of reasons why you'd want to use more than one. Let's go ahead and demystify the last light, the spotlight. So if directional light is a light from an infinite direction, from an infinite source, the sun, then what is skylight? Skylight is a light that finds a way to make it into the shadows. It's the secondary bounce that comes off of every object when it is hit by light. Watch what happens when I drag in the skylight. Does everybody see kind of how that worked? Drag it away. This is how you can A/B things. If you're dragging in and out, or if you're dragging from the content. I don't think you get the same effect here, because you have to drag it off. But you see kind of how it works. Let's drag this into the scene. And we'll hit W to move it up. And as you can see, we have a preview light, but that's pretty close to what we're going to get for the result, so I'm not going to rebake it. But look at this for a second. These two lights work well together. This light is also incredibly complex. Skylight is probably one of the biggest things that people have talked about. There's a bunch of videos that talk about demystifying the skylight. The skylight is a very strange, nebulous light that is not necessarily analogous to any light that actually exists IRL, in real life. We don't really have anything like that. We just don't. The light and the shadows is usually what I refer to it as. Oh, this is much nicer to have that so slow. It's the light and the shadows. And as being light in the shadows, it has its own intensity scale. You can see how it lights everything up. I'm going to set that to 0.3. It has its own light color, which affects kind of like the secondary bounces. It's very soft. In fact, typically speaking, if I'm doing something outdoors, go with a little bit of blue, slightly desaturated. Creates a nice, more comfortable shadow. And if I need a little more power, there we go. A little bit more brightness, a little bit more oomph. But it does so much heavy lifting. Again, it has mobility settings. Again, it has transforms. It has a button here that is available mostly for lumen. We don't have to leave that on. Leave that off by default. It has a cube map, which means that you can apply what is essentially an HDR image in here. For those of you who know what HDR images are, for those of you who don't know what HDR images are, what they are is an image that captures white past a certain scale into your hyper white, and you get your full blacks and hyper whites from that image because it has so much data packed into it. Those images are usually captured by DSLRs or incredibly expensive cameras, of which I don't own. I usually get my HDRIs from HDRI Heaven, and they are great for creating a very specific type of lighting in a scene if you have a capture for that scene. You can up the resolution from that, intensity, blah, blah. The only one that's really, really good is the intensity scale, and then we have cast shadows, which is weird because this doesn't really cast a shadow. Effects world, obviously on or off. And then we have the advanced settings down here. We also have the ability to do DFAO, which is distant field ambient occlusion. We'll talk about that one in the future. We have atmosphere and cloud, which is another tool. We have the ability to add ray tracing to it, and this can be terrifying. This light is probably the most technically advanced, but don't worry about it. We'll talk about that in a future demo. With a final build, Control-Shift semicolon and let it cook. We see that the lighting gets set up properly. Now everyone noticed that that shadow got kind of blobby for a second, then it's still kind of blobby. We'll talk about fixing that here shortly. But for now, just kind of accept it as it is, and it'll be fine. Everything will be alright. Like that song by Bob Marley. Let's go ahead and delete this box here. And I'm going to go ahead and set something up. Does everybody see what happened? What causes that? Think about it for a moment. We talked about this. It's Lightmaps. Just the shadow has been baked into the ground. Why would it delete the shadow if we've already baked the object into the ground? There's no reason for it to delete the shadow. And in fact, this is kind of a way that people fake shadows sometimes. They'll leave objects in and then delete them, and then, well, as you can see, the camera treats us as though we're in a shadow. See? We don't get that effect out here, but we get that effect in here. There is physically a shadow on the ground. It's just spray painted there. So with another build, it goes away. Let me build a little sample scene here. And this is a sample scene that you guys will probably want to build for the next demo. But let's go ahead and go into the content drawer. Now, if you didn't start with starter content, let's go ahead and add future content pack. Go to content packs and add starter content. Now, someone asked me a very good question the other day. They PM'd me. Mr. Figueroa, I don't see the first person demo inside of adding your projects. This is a bug. This is an oversight from UE5 right now. In order to bring in the first person project to an already made project, you actually have to physically merge two projects together. I'll talk about merging in a future demo when we're talking about merging multiple projects together. And in fact, that's going to have to be for next week, because that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be merging projects together. And it can be a little scary, but don't worry. I will walk you through every step to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. All right? Let's go ahead and just add the starter content if you haven't added it. And we'll go from there. Open up your content drawer, and you can see I have a bunch of maps. And in fact, since this is a new map, let's go ahead, File, Save Current Level. And I'm going to call this Redone Demo 160, and hit Save. Make sure you're saving that in the Maps folder. If you do not have a Maps folder, just right-click the Content folder and click New, or have your Content folder selected, right-click the background, and create a new folder. There we go. Let's go ahead and open up the starter content, and I'm going to make something fun and cute. This might be a little bit different than the video, but it doesn't really matter. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up architecture. Let's bump that open, and I'm going to grab the wall door. I'm going to grab the 4x300 one. You don't have to grab that one. I'm going to grab the wall window. I'm going to grab the wall. And I'm going to grab the floor. Alright, I'm going to build real quick. Just going to build something cute. Build something small. Some of this stuff ended up in the floor here. That's okay, it's because I dragged it in. Let's move it up and then press End to make sure it's made it down to the ground. Cool, cool. And now I'm just going to... do I want that level of precision? This is where you have to decide if you need more precision. Oh, that's a little too much. We'll do it to 10. And that way things will line up a little bit better. Cool. We'll move it this way. Let's do this. We'll just have some fun with this. I'm just going to set this up for the demo, of course, so it's not going to be a big deal. Whatever works for you guys. You don't have to struggle or spend too much time doing this. I just want to make something cute, something small that I can kind of get to work with on, and the rest is going to be pretty simple. Now, if you want to be really fast about it, you can always go to a different perspective mode and then like be hyper accurate about where everything is going to be placed. And then if that's what makes you care about it, then absolutely go ahead. But generally speaking, I just like kind of working as... Actually, my mouse is set too fast. That's why I'm very sloppy about this. A slower mouse is a happier mouse. So let's do that. We'll put that room over there. Let's see, is this too wide? If it's inset a little bit, no one's going to care. I'm not the police. It's exactly what a cop would say, though. Huh? Let's do one more room. Might as well. Let's delete that. And then we'll... oh, grab the wrong one. Move that back in. There we go. We'll put this one right here. We'll do one more room. Cool. And then we'll... I think that'll be okay. We'll do that. This is going to be a little different from the other one. I'm just using this for demo purposes. Like I said, this is a reshoot. Let's grab this one again. We'll rotate that one 90 degrees. I'll put this in the right spot. Is that good enough? Are we in the wall there? Yeah, we are. It's not gonna be perfect, but you know what? It'll be fine. Let's make sure it's lined up okay. See what's going on there. Let's do a top view. Might just not line up because of the size of the building, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be good enough. So we're gonna have a slightly canted off window, but as long as we have some amount of closure, we should be fine. It's not going to be a big deal. Okay, let's go ahead and grab our roof here. So we've got our little house here that we've made. It's almost like your guys' first assignment. I might need to make this a little bit larger to get it to fit, but we'll see if it needs a little bit more futzing. If it does, I'll just scale it out a little bit more. Is that sitting okay? One more budge. Here we go. And we'll move this over here. Doesn't have to be perfect. Again, I'm just gonna seal in the flavor. Really trying to seal that up. Make sure we can't get into those spaces. That looks like it's not placed properly. Let's go inside and have a look. That'll be fine. That'll get fixed. That'll get fixed. Alright. You know what else? I'm going to grab the basic wall, and I'm also going to dock this in my layout here. So I want the basic wall material. Have that selected. I'm going to select this, and then I'm just going to use that material here. Cool. And I'm going to rename these Roof 1, F2, Roof 2. It's important to rename things. Roof 3. And then I'm going to select everything with the word floor. Cool, that's all selected. So I search for it and then hit enter. And then I'm going to apply the default material. Actually, no. I want the... Did that get applied properly? Is that the basic wall? Yeah, it is. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the content browser now. I love the new content browser. It's real slick. Okay. Now let's go ahead and add a few things. I'm going to go ahead and add a shape here. Now this one you should probably rename here. I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'm going to call this one, I think in the demo I called it Walking Man. And this one should be set to movable. And this will start the discussion on mobility settings. Actually, leave it to static for now. You'll see me play around with the mobility settings in the other room, in the other demo. But for now, let's also go ahead and bring another one of these guys in there. I'm holding down Alt when I do that, so we can see kind of what's happening in this particular scene. I'll put that on the ground. Actually, you know what? I'm going to bring it up. Hit End. Is it already on the ground? Hit End. Yep, it's already on the ground. And then I'm going to grab... let's go for the front perspective. I'm going to grab all these things. I'm going to make sure I don't have the sky sphere selected. That's where I run into issues with selecting the sky sphere. Double check to make sure all your selections look good. We'll go back to perspective mode. And I'm just going to place this somewhere useful. Ensure on the ground. Cool. Deselect. I'm going to hit Q to go back in select mode. I'm going to delete my skylight because I want to have this set up just to have a single light. And I think in the next demo I'm going to talk about the mobility settings. I'm pretty sure I am because I talk about it, but I'm trying to remember which setting I have it set up. Just for safety's sake, you can go ahead and leave it on static. And then I'm going to do a build. That's with the directional light set to static. Now, what you're looking at right now is a bug. Give the Z buffer an opportunity to clear itself. You might just need to right-click and give it a little wiggle. Now, what you're seeing right here is a pretty normal visual bug in relation to the Unreal Engine. This is just something that happens when the engine gets an opportunity to bake, but does it at such a low setting that it doesn't really know what each of these panels are. Sometimes these issues persist even when you are finished with your game. Do you want to know what Unreal thinks about fixing this stuff? And we'll talk about more troubleshooting stuff in the futures. What lighting error? Every problem that you can see lighting-wise on every asset is going to be typically because you don't have them textured. Now, this one doesn't tile very well. That's what we're seeing. It's not a lighting issue. It's a tiling issue. This texture doesn't tile very well. It tiles from medium range. This is about how well it's going to be. We hit play. We see that it looks a lot better already. But again, you don't have to apply a texture to the ground. If you want to go ahead and follow the demos along, it does a really good job. I follow along and cover this stuff. Again, let me apologize. This is a re-recording, so I feel like I'm missing something, but I also feel like I covered absolutely everything that I needed to. I'll talk about fixing those things in the future because it's going to be necessary. But for now, once you are done and ready to go, and we can go ahead and put this guy on the ground too. He doesn't need to be floating around. Go ahead and do one last build, or if you really feel like it, you can do a build all levels. It will build the lighting because it builds everything, including the navigation. It might take a second longer. You'll get this fancy window. It tells you that something needs to be rebuilt. Boom. Correct. Here's that visual bug. The Z buffer takes a moment to catch up, and there we go. Sometimes it needs a wiggle in order to get working. I should talk about this before I close this out. This is the atmospheric fog. It does very little. It's just in there by default. Let me show you what it does. Over here in the World Outliner, you have the ability to show and hide things by poking the eye out. Not visible, visible. Not visible, visible. As you can see, it adds a little bit of pizzazz to the air. There are very few things that it can actually do. That's all it can do. And most of these things aren't even perceptible unless you have more lights in scene. It's nice to have. It really is. But if we're inside a building, we can't actually see it. Notice how everything is brightening up while we are inside this scene. The next videos will talk about the adaptive eye, what's good, what's bad, why you want it, why you don't want it, and then you guys can decide for yourselves. Personally, I turn that shit off, but only turn it on back for production once it's ready to go. But nonetheless, this gets you staged up for the other videos in this series, so I apologize once more having to re-record this. I don't believe I inappropriately recorded anything this time. Everything's on screen. Everybody can see the details panel. I recorded like an hour and a half of video with the details panel covered by my head. What a terrible mistake, but I recorded this because I want you guys to get this, because this stuff is important, and I know we're taking it slow. All right? So when you hop into the next video, hopefully everything will be set, and you'll be able to see a result from everything. So go ahead and build something that looks like this, and I'll see you in the next one.